It's the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to have you all with us once again. We have a jam-packed show, multiple special guests, multiple interviews, and a lot to get to. A Titanic show. John Sheeran, do you like the pun there? How are you, sir? This has been a whirlwind week for the Cincinnati Bengals and for us covering the team. How you doing, man? You hanging in there?
As I said on Monday, man, it'd be a great week for a bye week. But nope, we just gotta handle all these things full force. So let's get into it.
Well, I know you and the rest of the crew at Cincy Jungle have been just hammering it out, and I know you and I have put in a lot of work to this particular episode, and you know what we've been doing recently. So we're gonna get you a lot of different information. Just to give you a quick rundown of what we're gonna do here, we're gonna talk about the Carlos Dunlap trade that occurred earlier on Wednesday. John Sheeran's got kind of some inside information there that he's going to share with us based on some conversations he has had with the Carlos Dunlap camp. And we'll talk about that. We'll give our own 2 cents on the situation, what the Bengals netted there, what was given, all of that. And then we've got a little bit of a insight from Brandon Schultz from Field Gulls, the SB Nation Seattle Seahawks site. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the thoughts. We had an interview earlier today talking with him about the Carlos Dunlap trade, and of course, the offensive lineman the Bengals got out of it, giving us a little insight there. So we'll talk about that. We'll break down the Browns game too. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, we got to preview the Titans game, and we're doing so with very special guest Denard Walker of the BLEAV in Titans podcast, former Tennessee Titan himself, joining us, talking about the upcoming Week 8 matchup, and then we are going to wrap it up. So we've got a lot to get to. John, are you ready, my friend?
Yeah, let's just do this.
I'm building it up. I'm building up the suspense. Let's just, I'm going to share my screen a couple of times here, folks, so bear with us as we do this. Here we go right here. In case you are living under a rock and did not hear this today, earlier, you see 9:01 a.m., that is Pacific time for me, but the Bengals traded Carlos Dunlap to the Seahawks. What they got is a 7th-round pick and offensive lineman B.J. Finney, a career backup offensive lineman, spent some time with the Pittsburgh Steelers and now with the Seattle Seahawks. So that came across today, and this situation with Carlos Dunlap became irreparable, and they needed to make a move here. And while the compensation seems a bit low for a guy like Carlos Dunlap's resume, that's kind of where the market was set based on the Everson Griffin trade that was made earlier in the week. So that is what transpired as of Wednesday. Now, I'm going to share this with you real quick. This is courtesy of Lindsay Patterson, Cincinnati media member. She put out on her Twitter account the verbiage of the statement by Mike Brown, Bengals owner, who had some words about Carlos Dunlap, and lo and behold, this is something that is very positive, and there seems to be very little to no animosity, at least on the Bengals ownership side or the card that they are showing the public. John Sheeran, Carlos had many fine seasons here and showed rare physical talent that took him to multiple Pro Bowls, said Bengals president Mike Brown. I will always remember the role he played as a key part of exceptional defenses that we rode to the playoffs year after year. There are a lot of fond memories I have of Carlos, and I wish him well. I don't know, initial thoughts, initial reactions, John. I know you have spoken to a specific individual close to Carlos Dunlap himself, and I don't know if you want to kind of start there or whatever you would like on this, because there's a lot to digest here.
It's been a long 3 weeks of seeing this situation unfold, and it's been all over social media, obviously, and we've covered it. And even though it's been so public in how Dunlap has handled the situation, there's always another side to the story. There's always hidden facts that we are not privy to. And we all know how this kind of boiled up. At the end of the Browns game, Dunlap was seen arguing with defense coordinator Lou Anarumo on the sideline. He required Zach Taylor and other players to kind of break it up and ease the situation. But we all know that was the boiling point, right? Because it was reported on Wednesday that Dunlap was told not to come into work because they were figuring out a trade and figuring out how to resolve the situation, and then it happened. So we all know that that's what was the tipping point. That's not a secret. And we covered that, on Cincy Jungle. We posted it right after the game ended. And an hour after the article went up, I got an email from Carlos Dunlap Sr. Just out of the blue. He apparently read the article and he reached out to me and wanted to talk to me about what exactly has been going on in the situation. He was frustrated about the lack of communication from the Bengals part and Dunlap's part and wanted to, I guess, set the record straight. So we set up a phone conversation on Monday afternoon and he laid it all out for me in 20 minutes. And I'm not going to dive into every single thing that he said because I don't want to take up everyone's valuable time here. But in short, ever since Zach Taylor and Lou Anarumo have gotten here, Dunlap and Anarumo have not really been on the same page. They've been butting heads. This thing has gone back to 2019, as I think a lot of us remember from that year. But obviously, Dunlap turned it on towards the end of 2019, and those issues didn't really matter because he was producing. He was, playing up to his role and his money. But, Dunlap never really respected the Anarumo as a defensive coordinator or his coaching style. I believe that Dunlap Sr. said, he was really authoritative, quote unquote, my way or the highway. He didn't like the fact that on a defensive line that was mainly comprised of veterans that spent a long time in the league, Anarumo doesn't really take advice from those guys. It's really just his way or you don't play. And he didn't vote well with that. He didn't think that he was qualified. He didn't think he was competent as a defensive coordinator. And even when they spent all this money on the defense side of the ball in free agency, he didn't like the fact that they didn't even try to upgrade at defense coordinator. So Anarumo came back for a second year. Dunlap came back, obviously, because he was under contract. But according to him, ever since the start of this year, Zach Taylor and Lou Anarumo have been trying to offload Carlos Dunlap from the Bengals. And we all know that, they came to Geno Atkins about potentially limiting his, snaps in a rotational role to ease him into the later part of the season so he can stay fresh. They kind of approached Dunlap with that as well, but it wasn't as authentic and true as it was for Geno. It was mainly just a cover up to basically limit the amount of snaps that he has. And it didn't really end up that way because in the first 4 weeks, he was still playing the majority of the snaps. And it looked like, everything was fine. And then we all know what happened in week 5 or leading up to week 5. He saw his demotion on the whiteboard. It's true. He was not told about that by any of the coaches. And it was around this time that Zach Taylor said something to Carlos that I'm not going to repeat on here because he told it was just kept for me, but it was something along the lines of, we don't want you a part of this team anymore. And it was something that Dunlap had never really experienced before, had never seen another player being told that in front of other players like that in that fashion. And that was kind of the beginning of the end. It was at that point, Dunlap was demoted for the sole purpose of devaluing his, I guess, value. It was the front office didn't want to trade Dunlap. They didn't want to cut him. They were still paying him a certain amount of money for this year. And then they were going to try to see what this resolution was in the offseason. They didn't want to cut him during the season. But Anarumo and Taylor, they had other plans. They didn't want him around anymore. It just was never a good fit. And it was past time for a divorce. But the front office wouldn't see that way. They wouldn't allow Zach Taylor to do anything with him. They wouldn't allow him to be traded or cut or anything like that. So it just became a matter of, we're going to bench you. We're going to make you as unproductive as possible so we can convince the front office that you are not valuable anymore and we need to offload you. And that's where the demotion really came from. And that's why you only played like 12 snaps and mainly on passing downs. And that happened for the next 3 weeks or so. And then, as we saw in the Browns game, it all boiled to a point. And he called me later, and Dunlap Sr. called me later today and explained what happened at the end of that game. Dunlap was on the field for the final plays of the game, and we saw Baker Mayfield throw 2 big passes down the right sideline and eventually for a touchdown. Dunlap went to the sideline after that play. He confronted or complained to Anarumo about the lack of personnel on the field, or he didn't agree with the play call. And essentially, Anarumo said something to him. There was profanity involved, and Dunlap essentially lost his cool. And that's what we saw. We saw him confront him. And then after that game was over, Dunlap and his camp said, I'm not coming into the building until we have some resolution here. And they told Dunlap to not come into work on Monday. It was reported on Wednesday, but it eventually started on Monday. And they tried to, preface it with, we're looking for a trade, but that was never a thing until the start of this week. It was never looking out for the best of Dunlap. It was just, we're sticking to our guns here, and we want you on this team. We're not going to trade you, but we're not going to play you either. So a lot of things boiled up to this point, and he's now a Seattle Seahawk. He was almost a Detroit Lion, though. They originally wanted to send him to Detroit, but Dunlap did not want to go to Detroit. So they eventually worked out a deal with Seattle. And also the the Brown family was not going to trade him and pay him the full money that he was owed. They only wanted to pay him $2.5 million. But Dunlap basically just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to buy my way out of this. I'm going to give you back the $5 million that I'm owed back to you so we can get this done. And more or less, that's essentially what happened.
Eye-opening, to say the very least. And I want to say this. I have actually had some interactions with Carlos Dunlap Sr. over the years as well. He's been a very pleasant man, and he has, sometimes, John, you always get this reminder of, there are a lot of people that read your articles, and there's someone that kind of pops up and you go, oh, that person reads my work on Cincy Jungle, or here's my work. It's kind of interesting to see that happen. But I will say Carlos Dunlap Sr. was always great to us at Cincy Jungle. He always tried to promote what his son was doing in the community and what he was doing down south in terms of community work. And he always gave us a heads up to try and promote that. So kudos to him. And I know that this is coming from Dunlap's dad. So, I mean, there is a certain perspective that comes with that, but that is eye-opening stuff. And like you said, John, when that image of him yelling with Lou Anarumo on the sideline, that was it. I mean, if it wasn't it before, you couldn't, it was irreparable. And that's kind of the situation here. I guess I'm one of the things you said towards the end there really kind of resonated with me, in the fact that Dunlap was willing to give up money or give back money to get out of here. That is just kind of shocking. It's not shocking that Mike Brown and company did not want to pay all of the money to Carlos. We know that sometimes has been the organization's MO. I will say this, and I want to ask you this: did anything come about in this conversation? And feel free, if you can't divulge it, don't worry about it. But did anything come about the wins and losses as kind of the primary reason, or was it just the butting of heads with Lou Anarumo and, I guess, to an ancillary factor, Zach Taylor, because Zach Taylor was backing Anarumo? Was that just basically it? Because Dunlap's seen a lot of highs and lows in terms of wins and losses with this organization.
It was never really about the overall success. Like it was obviously a difference between being coached by Marvin Lewis and his defense coordinators, and then there's always that transition with a new staff and how they handle veterans who are on the previous team, right? This isn't anything new. Usually these things are just handled a little bit more quickly and not in the middle of the season and not with a lot of turmoil. It's not like fascinating information that a certain veteran doesn't get along with a coach that was recently brought in, but it was just the fact that from the very beginning, from 2019, it was never a good fit, and eventually just got to the point where Dunlap knew that he was either not going to play and just do nothing and just sit on the bench, or he needed to force his way out of there, because, to reiterate, the Bengals front office did not want to trade him. That's not shocking information either. They don't like to trade away veteran players in the middle of their massive contracts when they still have signing bonuses that still are on the salary cap for future years and whatnot. So that was obviously not what they wanted to do. But Dunlap knew that if he didn't do anything, that he would just rot on the bench for 10 to 15 snaps a game, because the coaching staff did not want him on the team. But they knew they couldn't just healthy scratch him or do anything, because then they would get an earful from the front office. Why aren't you playing this guy? We're paying him $13 million a year. What's going on here? We don't want to trade him. So it was just this massive disconnect, and that's essentially how it happened. Dunlap wanted to play. Dunlap still loves the Bengals. He still loves Cincinnati. He has no ill will towards the organization in any way. It was always just a beef with the coaching staff, not anything else with the direction or the success of the team in general.
You do wonder what would happen if the Bengals were winning games and he was sitting on the bench or getting these 12 snaps a game, but they were winning. If that, what would be the optics here? And I think we all know, John, that because this organization is very slow to change and they love to kind of win those power battles with their players in terms of trade me or whatever, we know, I think that, this is why Carlos Dunlap did kind of these passive aggressive social media videos. And I mean, we saw him taking down his parking sign earlier today and all kinds of different things, because that's the kind of attention that needs to be given to the organization in order for them to make this kind of move. At least that's my opinion of it.
Yeah. Like I know that this is one source and obviously one side of the argument, but this is the side that we don't see. Like every time this happens with the Bengals player, the team, and they post like a heartwarming like farewell on social media, and we hear the coaches say the right things to the media. So we always assume that they are not in the wrong. They always handle these things right, and it's the player that's whining and complaining and forcing his way out of a situation that doesn't benefit him anymore. That's always the perception that we see. So I understand that this is obviously much different than what we've been hearing, and it's just one side of the story. But it's not like we can just completely just take it for nothing just because it's obviously a biased side. Like, and talking to him for 3 times this week, it's clear that these his dad is obviously really close to his son. He manages a lot of his things for him, and I believe that whatever is going on in his mind was going on in his father's mind too. And obviously they communicate daily and all these things. So whatever he said, I'm sure that's exactly what Carlos was thinking, and the stuff that what he was telling him was true. So I know people are mad that this is only telling one side of the story. How credible is this? I'm just saying these were the things that were said to me by a guy who reached out to me, and I think we should value it a little bit more, because at the end of the day, Dunlap just wanted to play, right? And in fairness, he wasn't playing that well in the beginning of the season, and the coaches had reason to limit his role to a certain extent. But when there is that just decisive decision for the player, like if I'm not valued here and if I'm not going to play here, I want out, then it's up to the team to respect those wishes and to try to make something happen. Because if you don't, then you end up with situations like this where the player gets disgruntled enough to the point where he's posting depth charts and rotations on Instagram and he's arguing with coaches on the sideline. The situation was definitely avoidable up to the point where it has gotten if the organization and the staff respect the wishes of him, because they decided that this player was not valuable to them anymore.
So I've been going back and forth a bit, not only in my own mind about this whole situation, and we don't want to belabor this for the entire show, but there is a bit more to get to on this, and I want to hear a little bit more of your opinions on this, John, especially based on those conversations you had with Carlos Dunlap Sr. But I've been in my own mind, I've kind of been going back and forth on this, and with other people, Bengals fans on Twitter, and to me, I still see there's 2 sides to this, and I'm glad we heard the Dunlap side, because I don't know that he's going to ever really come out. Maybe down the road he'll come out and kind of talk about some of these things. I think we kind of knew to an extent some of it, but maybe definitely not the details that you provided there and the specific people that you talked about there. But I think a lot of people can maybe resonate with the fact that they've been maybe working in an organization that they love. And they love working there, but because of that passion for that organization, you get frustrated with the shortcomings. You get frustrated with certain decisions, leadership decisions. You get frustrated with personnel decisions, who gets promoted, who gets demoted, who gets the raise, who doesn't get the raise. I know pretty much all of us that listen to host these shows have not played professional football, but I think there is sort of something that resonates with a lot of us that have maybe worked at an organization, and you see the shortcomings and it frustrates you, and you put up with it and you deal with it. And then finally you just kind of say, I can't do this anymore. I cannot deal with this anymore. And the people that you have put in power, or my superiors or what have you, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And that's not to, pat Carlos Dunlap on the back on his way over to Seattle and say, shame on the Bengals, shame on the Bengals. This is a 2-way thing too. I mentioned, I don't think Carlos Dunlap did many of the right maneuvers to using social media the way he did. But I think also that's kind of what had to get the organization's attention and force their hand to move him. Ultimately, I think this is something that benefits all parties. I guess in a way you shed some of the contract that's Carlos Dunlap. You get, I guess, someone who's kind of sour out of that locker room, and Carlos gets an opportunity to go play for a contender, and he gets a fresh start, and the Bengals get a little something, I guess, in return for that. I don't think the yield really matches the talent that you gave away, but that's kind of where the market was set, folks. I mean, we saw that with the Everson Griffin trade. That's kind of where it was set. So, I think the one caveat to this, John, and I want to get your thoughts, your additional thoughts based on what information you've divulged to us. But This is kind of a little bit of a track record with the Cincinnati Bengals, and every team has malcontents, every team has holdouts, every team has this. But I've said this a couple of times on Twitter and maybe even in some interviews. You can go back to Lamar Parrish, you can go to Carl Pickens, you can go to Corey Dillon, you can go to Takeo Spikes. Go back and listen to our interview with him, refusing to re-sign when free agency came with the Cincinnati Bengals. Even though Marvin Lewis, defensive guru, was coming to Cincinnati, he did not want to be a part of the Cincinnati Bengals and their ways, their losing ways, all of that. And it now goes into Carson Palmer, and now you parlay it into Carlos Dunlap. So there is a pattern here. So that's why I see this as a two-way street personally.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like, I don't think anybody is saying that Dunlap's image has not been tainted to a certain extent. Like, at the end of the things that he did, he probably deemed to be necessary in order to get to the spot now where he's not a contender, he's on a team that is willing to play him. But at the end of the day, like, we're still going to remember these 3 weeks and the way that he handled it, and it's not exactly the greatest thing for him. And that was also something that he talked about. His image has been tarnished a little bit, but this is a fresh start for him. Like, it's not us excusing the way that he did that, but it's also recognizing why it got to that point. And not every situation is the same. Like with Carson Palmer, it wasn't necessarily a clash with the coaching staff. It was a clash with the front office and their lack of aggressiveness to build a contending team around him. And that's where the disconnect was. With this disconnect, it was never with the front office or the Brown family or really anything within the organization aside from the coaching staff that was directing him and not playing him. So not every situation is the same, even though we can kind of look at the Bengals and the track record with handling veterans and think these guys are not the best at closing out careers of the greatest players. But in this case, it was a situation where it was just with the coaching staff. And like you said, a divorce was needed, and kudos to the Bengals for finally actually doing that, because if they don't, the situation only gets worse as the season goes on.
Two things to think about. Lou Anarumo was essentially who I guess is the catalyst behind a lot of this, the angst between Dunlap and the organization or the coaching staff. Lou Anarumo was about choice number 4 or 5 that Zach Taylor potentially, reportedly explored for his defensive coordinator search when he took over last year. So that kind of just casts a whole new shadow on this entire thing. And the other thing on the positive side for the Bengals, there are a lot of young core players on this team who at least are saying the right things and doing the right things and buying into Zach Taylor, et cetera. You look at Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Tyler Boyd, those guys that you're set to build around over the next couple of years. Those guys are kind of saying the right things and vocally supporting their coach and the organization. So I guess take that for what you will. John, earlier, I'm gonna share this here. Earlier today, we spoke with Brandon Schultz of Field Gulls, the SB Nation site that covers the Seattle Seahawks. I actually had the privilege of also going on his show and talking about the trade. He talked a little bit about Carlos Dunlap, his potential role with going forward with the Seattle Seahawks, as well as BJ Finney, the offensive lineman the Bengals got in the trade, gave us a little bit of insight of that. So I want to share this interview. It's about 12 or so minutes. So enjoy that. It was myself and Brandon Schultz talking. We're going to talk about a little bit more about what the Bengals are doing with their roster. We're going to talk about the Cleveland Browns game. And then, of course, we're going to preview the Titans with Denard Walker, part of the BLEAV in Titans podcast. So for now, enjoy this interview with Brandon Schultz of Field Gulls. The Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast is happy to be joined by Brandon Schultz of Field Gulls. He runs their podcast over there. We've got this nice blossoming relationship between our show and with Brandon. We're going to be talking about the Carlos Dunlap trade a little bit from the Seahawks side of things, as well as get some insight on BJ Finney. Before we do, Brandon, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's, I know that both of us are coming off of disappointing losses, both 37-34. And we can console each other a little bit after this Sunday and just hope that better things are ahead for both our teams.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, you guys are 5-1. We're 5-1. So it's a little bit different.
Well, it's a little bit different. I mean, you got the number 1 overall pick. We got Russell Wilson. It's, we're in good quarterback shape.
Just a little bit. But at least the Bengals do look to be in good shape at the quarterback position. But we're not here to talk about that, unfortunately. We are here to talk about what transpired Wednesday afternoon. I guess let's start with what the Seahawks received from the Cincinnati Bengals in veteran defensive end Carlos Dunlap. Obviously a need. And one thing I always marvel about, Brandon, with the Seattle Seahawks is they never seem to be content, even when they are one of the top teams in the NFL. They never seem to be content with what their current roster construction is. They are always looking to improve, and oftentimes with a valuable veteran. So what's kind of the pulse of Seahawks fans as Dunlap makes his way to Seattle?
Well, this is something that I think that Seahawks fans are frustrated didn't happen earlier, not necessarily with getting Dunlap, but just getting defensive line help in general. In the offseason, they identified defensive line as being a big issue. They went out, they signed Bruce Irvin to come back to the team, but he mainly plays strong side linebacker, but he does have a history of sacking the quarterback. So there was the hope there. They signed Benson Mayowa in the offseason, not a top name defensive line talent, but at least somebody that can come in and provide production. And he's been the most productive pass rusher to this point this season. There was some hope that Jadeveon Clowney would come back in the offseason. He wanted too much money. He ends up going to the Titans late in the offseason when it was kind of, every other move had been made. Everson Griffin had signed with the Cowboys. All the other free agents had come off the books. And really, Clowney was the only guy that was left. And for him not to come back to Seattle, it really, I think, it changed their offseason plans entirely of what they were looking to do along the defensive line. And, we saw Rasheem Green go down early, who was a former third-round pick who is kind of coming into his third year, so a lot of expectations there. They signed Darrell Taylor, or they drafted Darrell Taylor in the second round, traded up to get him. He's been injured, so there just a lot of injuries at the position. Bruce Irvin goes down to injury, so they're really stuck just having to find a way to make moves. And then for Carlos Dunlap to become available after seeing Everson Griffin then traded to the Detroit Lions, I think this was one of the best moves out there that was available. And I think Seahawks fans couldn't be happier with what they had to give up to get a guy like Dunlap.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second. Do you see Dunlap being a starter right away, or just kind of a heavy rotator right away? He's a guy, by the way, that he plays edge, but he has kicked inside on passing downs, and he can do some multiple things there. But is this a guy you see seeing heavy snaps right away based on what you're talking about with the injuries and everything on the defensive line?
I think so. It will depend on Rasheem Green is supposed to be back this week, and they kind of have similar body type and play similar positions. So I think but he's coming back from a neck injury. So those can be serious, and you never really know how somebody's going to respond from that. So I think that will depend a lot on how this rotation ends up going. It's I know we won't see him for this 49ers game coming up this Sunday, but he could be helpful to have against Josh Allen and the Bills next week.
Any concern? I personally don't have this concern, but I guess from the Seahawks side of things, I'm sure they've heard that Carlos Dunlap was disgruntled going into this trade scenario. Any concern that those kind of issues carry over, or do you believe, as I personally do you believe that it's going to kind of be fresh start, roses and sunshine as Dunlap goes in, especially with a rah-rah guy like Pete Carroll at head coach?
Yeah, I see it being a little bit different situation. Obviously, you referenced the Bengals schedule earlier. Playoffs probably not in the Bengals' future for this season. And Dunlap's getting to that point in his career that maybe he wants to, be involved, go deep in the playoffs. And with the Seahawks getting out to the 5-1 start, obviously looks like they're in pretty good shape to make the playoffs and maybe make a deep run, especially the way the offense is playing behind Russell Wilson this season. So I think that can be a motivating factor. Obviously, there is concern. I mean, there was talk about Antonio Brown coming to the Seahawks just before he was signed to the Bucs. So I mean, that was more of a concern character-wise. Like Dunlap, okay. I mean, from what I've heard from you is that Dunlap, he's done things in the community, been a part of that too. So I think that there's not as much concern, I think, type move being very frustrated with the Jets and then coming to Seattle and from all accounts being an excellent teammate.
Yeah, truth be told, I mean, this is one of those situations that probably works out well for all parties. Really kind of from the Bengals side of things, a little bit of addition by subtraction in terms of getting that distraction out of the locker room, even though the yield wasn't very high for what they got for a guy that has had the career like Dunlap. But, fresh start for him. a valuable player for the Seahawks. Bengals get some, a distraction out of their locker room, kind of a win-win-win all the way around, even though, it's kind of from the Bengals side of things, it's just a little sad about how this whole thing kind of played out here. Let's talk a little bit about BJ Finney, a guy that I have not, obviously we know the Bengals got the 7th round pick as well. 7th round pick is a 7th round pick. BJ Finney is a guy that joined the Seahawks recently. He initially was with the Steelers. Before that, he was an undrafted guy, an interior offensive lineman. What can you tell us about him? I know there's kind of limited information on him, but what can you tell Bengals fans maybe to expect, or what have you seen as he's gotten playing time with Seattle in his time there?
Well, let's start with the playing time. It's really short. He played 29 special team snaps, so he's been out on the field goal unit essentially.
Okay.
And that's all we've seen from BJ Finney, and it's been kind of disappointing because there were high hopes for what Finney would bring to the offense. Back in March, he was really one of the very first free agent signings for the Seahawks. They had signed Greg Olsen, but they signed him before that the free agency deadline opened up. And Finney was one of the first guys, and the Seahawks looking for help on the offensive line. I know Bengals fans would get a kick out of the fact that one of the guys they looked to for help was Cedric Ogbuehi, and so he's been the backup tackle essentially for the Seahawks. But BJ Finney was one of the other guys, and with Justin Britt having gone down to an ACL injury, and former 2nd round pick Ethan Posick having had back issues and injuries over his career, there was questions around whether or not he would be able to step into that center role. And so Seahawks fans were essentially penciling in BJ Finney as the starting center come week 1. And that never materialized. In fact, when training camp rolled around and we're starting to get word out of training camp of the number of snaps and first team, second team type guys, it was Ethan Posick as the number 1 guy, and BJ Finney was all the way at the 3rd guy who was getting snaps at center in training camp. So that was a huge surprise to hear that. He was a 2-year, $8 million acquisition. I think they did have the ability to cut him after 1 year for around $4 million. So I think this move was primarily to open up salary cap space to make the Dunbar move possible. And I think the Seahawks are even still going to have to make some salary cap restructuring to make that move fit within their salary cap, because they were the lowest out of all 32 NFL teams with about $1.5 million of cap space going into this move.
From what I understand, Finney, his deal was, I think, like you said, was a 2-year deal, and I think that second year was kind of an option type of right. year where a team can kind of get out of that, or they can keep it for another $4 million. And right now the Bengals' offensive line is a little bit battered. They had what equated to 4 backup offensive linemen playing at one point in the game last week. And the one guy who was the day 1 starter, Mike Jordan, was a guy who's kind of been a little bit up and down this year himself. So, I think with some questions along the offensive line, particularly along the interior of the offensive line, this acquisition makes sense for the Bengals. Was it in your estimation? Because, I think there are some similarities and some differences in terms of the schemes that the Seahawks run and the Steelers run. Obviously, much different quarterbacks between Big Ben and Russell Wilson back there. But, was it a scheme fit issue with Finney with the Seahawks, as opposed to, being a guy with the Steelers, and maybe the Bengals can get back to mining some gold out of this player? Or is it just he's just a guy with a kind of a low ceiling at this point?
I got the impression that it was more of a learning the playbook type issue, and there was the idea that he could play left guard, but then Mike Iupati, who's also coming off ACL injury, I think, but he was able to come back and re-sign with the Seahawks and start at left guard. And then the depth that the Seahawks have at guard helped make this trade possible too, because they've had just so many guys who I think are very close at that backup type starter level to play at guard. And so I just know when this trade happened, Seahawks fans were excited. And then we got the word that, there's a player that's going to be involved too. And so your mind starts going through, okay, well, where do we have depth? Where do we have guys that salary cap could be an issue that could help this team? And, you worry about it being a guy like KJ Wright maybe, or a guy like Jaron Reed on the defensive line who hasn't had the production that maybe would. He signed with the Seahawks for $10 million in the offseason for over 2 years, and so his salary cap could be an issue too. So those two guys on defense, you kind of lean there, and then on offense, it was BJ Finney, who, like I said, it was kind of a disappointment for him to be one of the first acquisitions and for him to not even really sniff the starting lineup, and then having some depth at tight end too. And so, Jacob Hollister is a guy who was on a restricted free agent tender, and he was one of the names that we thought that maybe with the Seahawks signing and drafting a tight end who had been on injured reserve, just about to come off, that maybe he would be involved in a trade too. So really, the Seahawks fans couldn't be happier with this being the move, and with it only being a 7th round pick thrown in there too.
Quickly, Bengals fans' expectations for Finney in terms of playing time or, career trajectory, that sort of thing. Is the bar pretty low?
I would say that, well, I think it has to be pretty low, but I think you look back to some of his time in Pittsburgh and the time where he was filling in at guard and center, and I think there is the hope that he could be a potential, the average starter, not going to be anything spectacular, but that's what Seahawks fans were expecting out of him. And I don't see any reason necessarily to expect any less than, potential borderline starter at either center or guard.
He's Brandon Schultz with Field Goals, the SB Nation Seattle Seahawks site, and he runs their podcast over there. Brandon, where can people find your work, get in touch with you, and check out everything that is going on with the Seahawks, and maybe even a little bit on keeping an eye on Carlos Dunlap?
Yeah, hop on over, fieldgulls.com. You can subscribe to this show, your show, Anthony, sbnation.com/NFL podcasts.
Well, thanks for coming on, Brandon. And for our listeners, I've told Brandon this a couple of times now. For our listeners, if you like joining us live, if you like the video component and all of that of our show, Brandon is the guy I have to personally thank, because last year we were having trouble trying to find a recording software, and Brandon was the guy. As we were going into preview week 1 against the Seahawks, Brandon was the guy who pointed me to StreamYard, that has kind of changed the whole show. So, Brandon, I want to personally thank you, and I'm sure our listeners thank you as well.
Yes, Anthony, glad I could make that happen. Appreciate you having me on. I'll do it anytime.
All right, stay well, my man.
You too.
So that was Brandon Schultz with Field Goals, the SB Nation Seattle Seahawks website, joining us for a bit to talk about Carlos Dunlap, his potential role, at least early on, with the Seattle Seahawks, and, of course, the acquisition the Bengals made. We'll talk one more minute about the acquisition and maybe what's ahead for the Cincinnati Bengals. I do want to just say this quickly. I did have the pleasure of meeting Carlos Dunlap at one point, and he was a very affable guy, very approachable. He was a massive, massive human being. But I just as a Bengals fan that has followed this team, really, Carlos Dunlap, I've covered the Cincinnati Bengals for Cincy Jungle since 2011, and obviously Carlos Dunlap's been just a figure of and a big one for the Bengals in that time since I've covered him. So personally, I'll be missed. I'm saddened a little bit of how this whole thing played out, John, as I'm sure you probably are too. But I caught myself thinking about him just that interaction I had with him in San Diego a handful of years ago. Very nice guy. And, we never got him on the show, unfortunately, but, best of luck to him.
Like, easily one of my favorite Bengals of all time. Favorite to cover, favorite to watch, favorite to be a fan of. Everything that he did on the field and off the field, that it was commendable. And that's what needs to be remembered about this. And you look at a guy like Dunlap, who still has like a couple quality good years left, for him to be traded away for essentially a backup offensive lineman in a draft pick that's never going to be anything. You have to, at the end of the day, you have to look at this and think, yeah, the Bengals just didn't really get anything out of this trade. But with how everything has happened, the fact that he wasn't productive when he got traded, and everything that everyone else saw about, how he handled the situation, for them to get anything at all, I guess, is a positive. Even though the draft pick's not going to do anything, obviously, but a guy in BJ Finney, who Brandon Schultz talked about a guy who could compete as a starter on this offensive line in any of the interior positions, someone who was decent when he had his opportunities in Pittsburgh. And yeah, I remember him, like, he got signed for 2 years by the Seahawks with the expectation to start, and he just never did. So the fact that, he lost that competition and then was traded, 7 weeks into the season after signing a 2-year deal, it's a little bit questionable. But now the Bengals are in a position to have a guy through the 2021 season to make the roster and potentially make an impact in the starting lineup.
One quick thing, this is on cincyjungle.com. Jason Markham wrote this one. The Bengals may not be done. Not only adding a player in free agency, if you've been following this show, Quentin Spain has been visiting the Cincinnati Bengals, and the headline right there, Bengals are still expected to sign him. And then there may even be there's some chatter of potentially more trades potentially coming for the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll see what happens there, and obviously cincyjungle.com will be breaking that. But the Bengals may not be done. They may not be done with the trade deadline coming up early next week. And, of course, you've got the Quentin Spain situation, another guy who could vie for a starting position there. Any thoughts on Spain before we move into the Browns and then into the Titans, John?
Yeah, Spain, he may not be a great option to start for an offensive line, but that's just how desperate the Bengals are. If they can get anybody that's better than Alex Redmond at right guard on a week-to-week basis, that Redmond might have his highs here and there, but some of they can probably rely on being better on any given week. They have to take that opportunity. So even if Spain may not be the greatest fit in this scheme, primarily a zone scheme because he's more of a gap and man blocker, I think they have to take that chance and see what he's got.
We're going to move on and talk a little bit about the Browns, loss to the Browns, and then, of course, we're going to talk about the upcoming game against the Tennessee Titans with Denard Walker, former Tennessee Titan himself and host of the BLEAV in Titans podcast. Just want to remind folks, get the show how you can: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, iHeartRadio, any number of major audio streaming platforms. Our show is available. The Cincy Jungle channel is what you want. You get our show, the Orange and Black Insider. You get Orange is the New Black with Ace Boogie and Zim Hude. You get Chalk Talk episodes with Matt Minnick, and a lot of those are video format, so you got to subscribe to our YouTube channel for that. And all of our content is on Cincy Jungle's Facebook page as well. We've got a lot of different live viewers tonight and have had a bunch throughout all of the episodes we've been doing recently. So we thank you for your support, and hopefully you enjoy what we've been bringing you in terms of Bengals coverage. John, you mentioned it. Mr. Carlos Dunlap Sr. Relayed the fact that Lou Anarumo and Carlos Dunlap Jr. were a little bit at odds, and that's an understatement. And now you have, for the second week in a row, a defensive collapse by the Cincinnati Bengals, and the microscope gets a little bit heavier on Lou Anarumo and his defensive unit. I know there are a lot of important players either not playing snaps, injured, etc., but big collapse by the Cincinnati Bengals in this one as they lose in shocking fashion. I guess maybe not as shocking if you've watched the Bengals for any period of time, but 37-34, they lose to the Browns at home, a game that they had in their hand at the very end.
There was this one Browns game like a while back. The Bengals won 56-44, and it had like multiple defensive TDs. Like that was the last time I remember a Bengals-Browns game scoring this much, aside from the Week 2 game. So I guess going back beyond just 2020, scoring like Jay Morrison of The Athletic said, this is the first time that a team scored more than 33 points and not punt and lose the game. It happened 55 times earlier in NFL history since the merger in 1970, and all 55 of those teams won. So it's back-to-back, man. It's just like the offense is finally clicking. Burrow and his receivers are very much in sync with each other. There's clear chemistry with his top 3 receivers, Tyler Boyd, AJ Green, T. Higgins. They're playing some of their best football. Higgins is finally coming into his own. He's almost got 200 receiving yards in the past 2 weeks. And even without, Joe Mixon on the field, even 100% or just not on the field at all, and without great run blocking from the offensive line, the offense is putting up points and sustaining drives. And this is the sign of a bad team. Even if the defense can have good weeks like they had against Baltimore a couple weeks ago, like if you have one unit that's playing out of their mind and one unit that chokes in the worst possible spots, that's just the sign of a bad team. Even if there's potential on both sides of the ball, if you can't put together for one game with both sides playing well, except against a lowly Jacksonville Jaguars team, you just don't have a lot of confidence that they can actually close out games. That's been the one thing. That's what Denard Walker said to us. 1-5-1 speaks for itself, but they've been in every single game, including this one, aside from the Ravens game. They just don't know how to close it out. Like we saw at the end of this game, like Patrick Judas, our own Patrick Judas of Cincy Jungle, said that they left too much time for Burrow because Burrow and the offense got the ball with 4.5 minutes to go. We all kind of felt that they were at least going to get a field goal or a touchdown out of that drive, or they were going to find the end zone. They were going to find a way to score. And it was just a matter of how much time are they going to leave the defense. They had a 4th and inches at the 2-yard line. They didn't have to get in the end zone there, but you can't fault Giovanni Bernard for falling into the end zone. If the Browns safety, Andrew Sendeo, if he tackles Giovanni Bernard at like the inch-yard line, the Bengals take about 30 seconds off the clock. They probably score on like a QB sneak. They leave maybe 20, 30 seconds left for the Browns, and they probably win that game. But if you can't give your defense a chance to hold the Browns 80 yards in a minute, then there's no excuses for that. It's completely on them for the second week in a row, and it's not going to change unless they just magically grow new players and have a new defense coordinator.
So I've got a couple of different numbers and things to throw out there. Bear with me there, but great points, John. And really, if you look back at it, if you go back to the Eagles game, Bengals had a 7-point lead to close that one out. 2 pass interference penalties. Eagles march all the way down and get an inexplicable game-tying touchdown at the end of that one. You go back to last week, giving up the 21-point lead. And then this one, again, just miraculous catch and throw after miraculous catch and throw that was given up by the Bengals defense. And you kind of say something's got to give there on that side of the football. And I know there's a lot of personnel attrition. William Jackson didn't play. Trey Waynes, your top 2 corners, are not playing. Geno Atkins on a snap, limited snap count. We talked about Dunlap's snap count. Mike Daniels coming back from injury. There's a DJ Reader out. All kinds of issues in terms of injury, but you got to make a play. You got to step up in crunch time. And you got to make a play. Someone on that defensive unit has to make a play, and you can point right at Lou Anarumo for that. You can point at Zach Taylor too. But I want to say this about the offense. You mentioned this. Take this for what you will. The Bengals last year, and I know it's with Ryan Finley and Andy Dalton under center for the season, but they scored more than 20 points 4 times. And 3 of those times were in the final 2 of them were in the final 2 weeks there. And 3 of them were in the final 5 weeks. So they only scored more than 21 points 4 times, 21 or more points 4 times last year. This year, they've scored more than that 5 times already. So there is a lot of progress. You can point directly at Joe Burrow for that, but there is some improvements in play calling in recent weeks for Zach Taylor. So I want to get your thoughts on that, on those numbers there, if there's really much there. I just found those stats to be kind of interesting myself. And of course, the 1-12-1 record, what you make of that.
Yeah, I think, to have that performance against the Colts, a defense that is still really good, at least statistically, and has personnel to affect games. I think that performance spoke volumes about the growth of not only Burrow, but his relationship and his communication with Zach Taylor, the play caller. I think Taylor has grown a lot in recent weeks with his quarterback, who's now well into his rookie year. I think he said a week ago that he doesn't feel like a rookie anymore. He's played 7 games now, and he feels comfortable in that leadership role on the field and in the locker room. So the lack of preseason, it doesn't matter anymore. He's in there. He's got enough reps to, establish himself as someone who can, take on these responsibilities and whatnot. And I think Taylor has grown with that as well. And his play calling has evolved into a more creative and diverse type of way that has helped the offense immensely. It's a way more efficient offense. Over the last 5 weeks now, I think Burrow's yards per attempt is 7.7, and on the year it's 6.9, because those first 2 games, which in fairness came within 4 or 5 days on the calendar, it was so low, it was below 6. So he's got a higher yards per attempt since week 3 over like Lamar Jackson, Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, and Kyler Murray. So the efficiency is kicking back up, and that's really helping the offense. And also because he's hitting on these deep balls as well. But also, we got to give credit to the offensive line. They played fantastic with Jonah Williams and Trey Hopkins leaving the game. Bobby Hart and Michael Jordan had 2 of the best games I think any of us have ever seen in the same game against guys like Sheldon Richardson, Larry Ogunjobi, and of course Myles Garrett, who didn't really do anything against Bobby Hart. So incredible by them to give the offense that chance. But like you said, man, like 12-1 or 1-12-1 in these one-score games, it's a clear and obvious theme. And regardless of the growth that Zach has made as a designer of an offense and as a play caller, he's got the responsibility to make these decisions in the most critical parts of the game. And the Bengals don't get swept by the Browns that much. And the last 2 times it happened, the coach got fired at the end of the year. I don't think at this point we're ready to make that call or prediction yet. But unless he shows growth in this one area, it's going to be tough for him to sell going into year 3.
This was a tough one. This was a tough one to swallow because that was another one you felt like they could, should, would have won, and they let it go. It's against a division rival. It's at home. And really, if you get that win, that has an opportunity to really turn around your season. Whether or not that makes the playoffs realistic or anything like that at 2-4-1, probably not. But you feel a lot better about your football team at that point. So this one, and then of course, just losing to the Browns. I know the Brown family does not like that. So, really for me, just kind of a final thought, and I want to get yours before we move on to the Titans, John. This to me also was a reminder of the value of Giovanni Bernard. Gio Bernard had about, I think, 90 or so combined yards, 30 plus receiving, 50 plus rushing. 50 plus receiving, 30 so rushing, had the touchdown catch on the 4th and goal. And then, John, he also was immense in pass protection, picking up blockers. There are times where he just gets lost in the shuffle, doesn't get the snaps and all of that. And he gets an opportunity and you go, there's that guy. That's why we've got 25 around. And that's at least that's something I took away. I know we tend to forget about him, but you kind of know why he's got that C on his chest. And I was really enjoying watching him play Sunday.
The stock of mustaches around the world have never been higher. he's representing it well. Like you said, 11 flawless snaps and pass protection. They did a great job of minimizing Myles Garrett off the edge. They gave Bobby Hart some help there from time to time with either Drew Sample or Gio kind of checking him off the line. But like you said, there's definite value to him being around still. And even if he wasn't exactly efficient running the ball, you can tell that he does some things different than Mixon. He gets downfield a little bit quicker, and he kind of helps out his blockers like that. So, like you said, even if we didn't see Trevion Williams out there when he was active, I think there was a reason why Gio was out there for most of the game.
Yep, and Rob Duncan here in the live YouTube chat. Mayfield has the games of his life against us. Damn, it pisses me off.
22 straight completions, man.
22 straight completions, 17 touchdowns in 6 career games, and a 5-1 record. That says quite a bit about Baker Mayfield. Bengals fall to 1-5-1 in the Joe Burrow era to start that off. We're going to transition now to preview the Titans. Let's hope the tide turns, I guess, a little bit for the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll see if that ends up being the case. But much like the Brandon Schultz interview, we spoke to Denard Walker, former Tennessee Titan and current host of the BLEAV in Titans podcast. We spoke to him a little bit earlier before this program took the air. We're going to share that interview. John and I spoke to him over the phone, and so we'll share that here in just a second. But it's a very enjoyable interview. I think you'll enjoy it too. So we're going to share that with you. As mentioned before, we have a very, very special guest joining us on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast tonight to help us preview Week 8 against the Tennessee Titans. The Cincinnati Bengals host them. And we have former Super Bowl team member of the Tennessee Titans, Denard Walker, defensive back, now the host of the BLEAV in Titans podcast, helping us to talk about Week 8. Denard, how you doing tonight?
Man, I'm doing great, man. How you guys doing?
We're doing well. I mean, despite 1-5-1, I guess we're doing all right. Should be, could be, would be, maybe 3-4 wins more for the Bengals at this point. But it is what it is. It's Cincinnati Bengals football, and we're excited to have you with us. As I mentioned, obviously you had a great career. Now you're representing the BLEAV Podcast Network and the Tennessee Titans, so that's very exciting. We'll hear more about that in a minute. I guess I want to, before we kind of dive into the X's and O's a little bit of the game itself, I guess I want to start a little bit with, you played for the Titans late 90s and into 2000, where you were playing the Cincinnati Bengals quite a bit. I guess I want to ask you a little bit about if you can give us a little insight of the Titans' internal perception of the Bengals at that point when you went up against them. Were they kind of perceived as a little bit of a doormat, and did that perception change quite a bit maybe when Marvin Lewis took over in 2003?
Because when I was doing the show this morning, I actually had a recollection of the old Bengals when I played them. And let me tell you something. That team was good in 1990. Well, let me tell you something. It was kind of like hot and cold with that team for the 4 years that I was in Tennessee from 97 to 2000. And let me tell you something. They had some playmakers. You had Carl Pickens. You had Darnay Scott, Corey Dillon. And then when those guys got rolling, I mean, they could play. They can play with anybody in the league. But the biggest question mark that I have with that team is they just really sometimes didn't have any heart. And what I mean by that is you didn't know what you were going to get, on Sundays. You might get a Bengals team that was going to play hard, and they typically played hard when it had Boomer and Siles in their quarterback, but they basically annihilated us and kicked us out of the playoffs in 1997 because of the way they played down in Cincy. So it was to me, I'll be honest with you, I always thought that organization had a lot of good talent, and I just thought when they got the right coach in there and the right mix of players, I knew that they were going to take off.
Yeah, Jeff Blake was pretty good, but he was no Steve McNair, that's for sure. And that's kind of the difference of why one team went to the Super Bowl, one team kind of stayed in the rut. But I guess let's transition towards the modern day Titans. They're 5-1 right now after going through a little speed bump with the COVID business and whatnot, and they're taking command of the AFC South. It's a pretty well-rounded team when looking at the rest of the NFL. But if there's one area of weakness on this team that you would have to say that is the one thing that can potentially slow them down, what would you identify that as being?
Well, as I kind of look at this unit, I mean, they're strong, of course, at the running back position, because of the D train, Derrick Henry, and Jeremy McMillan has been playing lights out, kind of spilling Derrick, which giving him some rest time, and that's really huge, especially as they get down the stretch, going into the season. The team is strong on the offensive line. These guys, that there's continuity among all of them. They play well together. I know we lost Taylor Lewan. That's a huge blow, but Ty Sembrano has stepped in. He had a heck of a job against Pittsburgh last week. Played well. Saffold, Jones, Davis, and Kelly, they're so underrated as a unit. I think the tight end position is strong. I think the only question mark that I would have is the secondary. That's because they don't have Adoree Jackson. And when you don't have your ace, out on the field, it hurts your team. So I think when they get Adoree back, I think he's going to strengthen that unit in the secondary. And I think you're going to see some better play from the entire defense, because I think when you add him into the mix, I think he makes your defense better, just his presence along being on the field.
Adoree Jackson's my boy, Denard. He's a USC guy, so I'm a big USC guy. I always liked Adoree Jackson. Very good player, very talented, highly athletic. So you're speaking my language there. We're talking with Denard Walker, member of the Tennessee Titans, 1999 AFC Championship team, Super Bowl member of that squad, joining us to talk about Week 8, Tennessee Titans taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. You mentioned his name a little bit, Denard. Taylor Lewan. The Titans lost Jack Conklin in free agency. You now lose Taylor Lewan to an injury. You didn't really mention that as much of a weakness, but maybe long term, is that something where you're looking at as a potential looming issue, especially when you're going into the time of year when the weather gets bad and the Titans may be wanting to rely a little more heavily on Derrick Henry?
No, I don't, because of the way that he played last week. And listen, he's a proven veteran. Anytime that I think so many times we get caught up in the backup position when you lose a starter and how would he perform. I've always said that when a guy, he has a number and he's a part of somebody's 32 teams, he can play. And the same expectations that they have when Taylor is in that game, they have the same expectations on Ty, that he can go out there and get the job done. They expect that. He's a pro. That's what makes guys, that's what gives them a chance to make a really good living, playing a game that they love. is they earn that spot, they earn that position. And I think Tossin Brayo, I think he gels with that group. Again, I don't think that it's gonna be a drop off. I know you can't replace a great player like Taylor, but again, when it's a guy's chance, I mean, Todd, this is a chance for Todd to show, listen, a lot of people that he's just as good, if not better, as Taylor. I hate to say that, but that's the mentality that you have to have. It's just your chance. And I think as he takes, advantage of this chance, that he's been given, I think he's going to utilize his abilities, and I think he's going to play well from here on out, because the guy can play. He's the real deal. So, again, like I said before, I think this is a team on the cusp of doing something great, and I still think that they have the chance, even though they lost a key piece, on that squad.
Funny enough, Ryan Tannehill, not like about a year ago, was a backup as well, and then he kind of asserted himself as the starter of that team, and he took the league by storm. And I think a lot of people expected him to kind of come back down to earth, but he's not. He's playing like a legitimate MVP. In your mind, what has been the one thing that Tannehill's taken from last year and really elevated into this year to keep up with this pace? And do you believe he's capable of leading the Titans to a Super Bowl?
He's just gotten better. I mean, what he's done is I said earlier in our podcast when we initially started, that as Ryan goes, so does his. I think he's been down some really bad roads in Miami, of course. That's why I ran him out of there. So there's nothing that can phase him. He's a veteran. And the thing that you love about Ron is, he's poised in the pockets. He's tough. We saw the hit last week that he took in the red zone, but he gets right up. He's resilient. And I think this team emulates his play. And one of the things that I love about quarterbacks, in this league, you can stay stagnant and you can be out of a job, or you got to be like Russell Wilson. You get better, each year you play. And that's what Ron has done. He's got better. He's brought different elements to his game. We saw, against Buffalo when, he didn't necessarily have the big yards passing, but we saw when he would, break some long runs. People forget how athletic he is. They forget his athleticism. He was a starting receiver at Texas A&M. And the guy's a stud. He's 6'4", and I remember Ryan at Texas A&M, because I'm a Texas guy. He was a great receiver. He was a number one receiver at Texas A&M. And he probably, if he stayed at receiver, he probably can play receiver in the league. And that's just to show you his athleticism. And that's something that you can't coach. And that's his strong point. People just forget that this guy, he's just like Russell Wilson. He just don't run as much, but when he does, I mean, he's a monster. It's really hard to defend because he's so versatile. And that's why I love his game. I mean, he's basically utilizing all of his dogs and abilities, and it's just been fun to watch him play.
Talking with Denard Walker, host of the BLEAV in Titans podcast, former NFL player, spent 4 seasons with the Tennessee Titans. Happy to have him with us, previewing Week 8, Bengals versus Titans. I want to go back a little bit, kind of to your playing days, if I can, and kind of bridge today from your playing days with the Titans. You mentioned his name as well, Derrick Henry, obviously one of, if not the best running back in football right now. You played with a great one on your sideline. And in fact, the old AFC Central had just a slew of great running backs in your time. I mean, there was Fred Taylor on Jacksonville, Corey Dillon on the Bengals. And then, of course, Bettis, on the Steelers. And then, of course, you had your guy, Eddie George, and a lot of Bengals fans are very familiar with him from his Ohio State days. He had just a great career, an absolutely massive back. If you had your choice, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. If you had your choice and you were saying I had to pick one of those two backs, Eddie George or Derrick Henry, I know it's a different game. I know different styles of play maybe a little bit, but if you had to pick one of those guys, who would you pick and why?
Let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you right this. I'm telling you right now, I'm going with EG, Eddie George. Why? Because he's one of my favorite players along Steve, Aaron McNair. They're my two favorite players of all time. And the thing that I love about Eddie is when you see Derrick is a reflection. He basically is a modern-day Eddie George, 6'3", 240-some pounds. People forget how fast Eddie was, how elusive, how big he was, and how strong. but I will always go with Deuce 7. He is the best running back that I've ever seen in my life. He's the toughest guy that I've ever seen. And let me just say this right now. I can sit here and talk all day about EG, but the thing that I love about Eddie, and people don't know this, is one thing, is that after a game, you got to understand our whole offense was predicated around EG. Everything was around, especially in those days, because that's when you really ran the ball. I mean, basically 30, 40 times a game with one back, a lot of times. And the guy would be in a boot on Monday, but he'll be full go on Wednesday at practice. Never took a practice off. And I tell you what, he played like that. Just a tough guy. He was a great person. And right now they're considering him. Hopefully he get in the Hall of Fame. I think he had a Hall of Fame career, and I'm just hoping he gets that. I hope he gets in.
Well, that's good. And then the Bengals are playing the lesser running back in Derrick Henry this week, but they still have a tough task in tackling Derrick Henry in this game. It's going to be a big mismatch for the Bengals, but as someone who covers the Titans and follows the Titans, what is one way, or I guess, what do the Bengals have to do to beat the Titans? Because it's going to be, it could potentially be an ugly game, and one of the Bengals are definitely not favored in. But what do they have to do in order to win this game?
Well, I don't want to give out the secret, because if I give out my secret sauce, then what's going to happen is you guys going to take that and you're going to give it to, Zach Taylor, and then all of a sudden, if they lose, then this could come back to me. But let me just say this, and I don't want that to happen, because I don't want, listen, I'm too old to be trying to fight some young boys today. I'm telling you, I'm not that old dog. I'm an old dog. I'm not like what I used to be. I'm 47 years old now, so I'm not trying to get into anybody's fight. But I'll say this, the Bengals, let me tell you something. I love this offense, okay? And I know you're going to talk about defense. You know what your offense is going to do. They basically have, pretty much giving you a chance to win all year. This is a team that probably could be 5-1 or 5-1, as opposed to 1-5-1. But the defense is really what's kind of their Achilles heel. And you know what? Until they can kind of get those guys up. I mean, I like Bledsoe. I like Covington. But again, they're young. And I think the secondary is they're kind of hurting right now. But again, I think if this team can find the way, because you are a reflection of how Zach Taylor actually got the team going in the right direction, because they've been in every game this year but one, and that's against the Ravens. So they keep losing close. But one of the things they got to do is that they just got to learn to make plays. And once they learn to make plays and finish out games, this is a dangerous football team. I know their record don't reflect that, but this is a team that can, if you step on the field with the mindset that this is a 1-5-1, they'll spank you. They will spank you. So I will tell people in Cincinnati, hey, listen, you got a great team. Once they get this defense going, you guys are going to be good for a long time to come.
I hope that's the case. And, I think Zach Taylor could use all the help he could get right now to scrape together a win. So, even though your secret is safe with us, I think he could use some help closing out some games. Before we get score prediction, by the way, we're talking to Denard Walker, former defensive back for the Tennessee Titans. He is now the host of the BLEAV and Titans podcast, BLEAV Podcast Network. So before we get on out of here with your score prediction and whatnot of the show, or of the game rather, and hear about your show, I want to get just a little bit of info from you here. You were part of the team that was part of the Music City Miracle. I wanted to just get a little bit of your thoughts as you saw that play unfold, because that is obviously one of the most iconic plays in NFL history. And, I would like to get your perspective on that as a player on that team.
Oh boy, you had to go back there, didn't you? Yeah, I just did a podcast. I did a show with the people at Buffalo, and they said we're not going to ask. Okay, this is everybody always want to, and I'm going to say this. I'm going to be honest with you guys, and I hate to say it like this, but if we were playing in Buffalo, they would have went ahead and played the Colts the following week. But because we played at Tennessee, I do believe that we got the call. So I wasn't really looking at the play, because I'm the guy that basically gave up to help put them in field position, because I had a bad day covering, and I barely stopped. It was at Price. He got a little hitch and ran about 10 yards on me. It was a shoestring tackle that I was able to make, that I made. But Yeah, I truly believe that sometimes when you're at home, you get the call, and I think we got the call that day. I think if we were in Buffalo, I think Buffalo would have went ahead and played Indianapolis the following week.
Talking with Denard Walker, host of the BLEAV and Titans podcast, and we'll hear more about that in one sec. Before we do, Denard, how do you see this one playing out? Week 8, Bengals versus Titans.
You know, this team. You know, when I watch them and I break them down, man, this is a good team. That's the thing about it. Their record don't really reflect their play, because every game they've been in but one. And that's the thing. If they can basically learn to close out a game like they start, this is they can basically make a run and be a hunt. Come like December and January. I mean, the team is that good. They just cannot close out games. So until they learn to close out games, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to give the edge to Tennessee. Now, I'm bad at this. I'm bad at making predictions for scores, but I'll say Tennessee. This is going to be a close one. And I'll say 31-24. Yeah, 24-31. I got the Titans winning. Okay,
fair enough. You are a bit more complimentary to the Cincinnati Bengals than maybe some others out there. So we appreciate that. We appreciate your time. This has been a heck of an interview. Been very, very enjoyable. Denard, where can people find your work now that you're on the BLEAV Podcast Network hosting the show talking about the Tennessee Titans?
Well, yeah, BLEAV in Titans. My man Davey Hudson and I, we basically just, you guys go in there. It's a great podcast. We have fun with it. We just talk football. We basically argue with each other. We go at it. We nitpick. Everything is like Davey comes with the analytics. I come from the football side of things. I don't want to hear his, analysis about, what this percentage, and then I'll come back at him. He comes back at me. So it's really fun. We have a really great time with the show. And it's just basically breaking down, the following game, what happened. I'm giving my opinion, which it probably don't mean nothing to anybody. So you can also find me on Twitter at Denard_Walker, and not be everything about what's going on with Tennessee. But I also want to say one thing before I go. I want to say you guys should be excited because Joe Burrow went to my alma mater, LSU.
There you go.
You guys got one heck of a quarterback. I love this guy. I love his swag. You guys got one of the best quarterbacks that's going to be in this game for a long time. So, again, Cincy fans, you guys need to be excited. It's your man.
Denard Walker, former Tennessee Titan, 9-year NFL veteran, member of the 1999 Tennessee Titans Super Bowl team, and now the host of the BLEAV in Titans podcast, part of the BLEAV in Podcast Network. So, Denard, I just want to thank you on behalf of John, Sheeran, and myself. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. I know you're an extremely busy guy, but it's been a lot of fun talking, and hopefully when these two teams play again, maybe that's postseason sometime in the near future, or maybe, somewhere down the road. We'd love to have you on again and talk to you.
Same, and thanks guys for having me. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That was Denard Walker, former Tennessee Titan. John, that was a lot of fun. I know there was a little bit of a disconnection there. Sorry about that for folks. It didn't take too long to get him back on the air, so that was good. But great having him on. Really enjoyable interview, and we hope you enjoyed that. Good. That was fun, John.
It was. It's nice talking to players that played before me, and I get to learn these insights about games that I never saw in person, but I've just heard about with hearsay. So another great guest on the show.
Absolutely, helping us break down the game against the Tennessee Titans, and we're going to talk about our take on that here in just a second. As usual, you can get this show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, or I guess Google Podcasts now, Megaphone, iHeartRadio. You can get the show on YouTube. There's a little subscribe link right underneath John Sheeran's shoulder there, so click that if you want our YouTube stuff. And, of course, all the stuff is on Cincy Jungle's Facebook. So we appreciate the support. Subscribe how you can. Leave us a rating on one of those platforms, too, the audio platforms, that is. Help boost a little bit of visibility for us on iTunes and whatnot. That would be great. Again, that was Denard Walker, BLEAV in Titan podcast, part of the BLEAV Podcast Network. That network has been excellent to this show, John, and I credit you for helping build that relationship there. Cam Rogers is kind of our point of contact there. We've had Eric Davis join us to preview the 49ers game last year. He was awesome. We had Takeo Spikes come our way to talk about his show and part of the BLEAV Podcast Network this summer. And then, of course, now we have Denard Walker, former Tennessee Titan, joining us. John, let's just do a couple. We're running long because of the multiple interviews and such a lot of, so many topics to get to tonight. Let's just do a couple final thoughts on what we think about this Titans game, what we heard from Denard, and maybe a couple predictions, etc. But key for the Bengals to come out of this one and get on the right side of that 1-12-1 close game record, if that game even comes to that.
So, I mean, right now, Jadeveon Clowney is not looking great to play in this game. I think he missed Wednesday's practice. He hurt his knee against the Steelers last week. If he doesn't play, that basically leaves Jeffrey Simmons and a bunch of other scrubs on the Titans defensive line right now. And really, their whole defense is kind of reeling. Kevin Byard is not playing up to his potential or what he was in years past. Like Denard said, they don't have a Dory Jackson out there. So Jonathan Joseph, if you guys remember him, he's their number one cornerback right now. Malcolm Butler, Christian Fulton's hurt. Malcolm Butler's not playing very well either. So this defense is exploitable, even though they had a good second half against the Steelers. And if that's how the Bengals are going to win, that's how they can win this game. It will be another shootout because I just don't foresee this defense coming close to stopping Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry. Even if they're not hitting on these insane plays down the field to A.J. Brown, Tannehill is still extremely accurate and just a great decision maker, and he's legitimately playing like one of the few actual MVP candidates right now. And it's tough to compete with that when your defense is nowhere near complete or competent in any way, shape, or form. So the over-under for this game is in the 50s again, just like it was last week against the Browns. We're probably going to see the Titans put up somewhere in the 30-point range, and it's just up to the Bengals to keep up with that.
Unfortunately, I believe you're correct. The pressure is on the Bengals offense to continue to score 30-plus points in a game, Burrow to throw 300-plus in a game in terms of passing yards and limit the turnovers. The one thing that's got to change this week, John, is somehow the Bengals got to find a way to pressure Tannehill, because what's going to happen is there's going to be play-action passes, potentially some deep drops with that. And if there is no pressure, Tannehill, even though he's athletic and fast, but he will hang back there all day and he will pick apart the Bengals defense. We've seen Baker Mayfield do it off of play action, and the Titans undoubtedly will want to utilize the same and use Derrick Henry not only as an immense weapon in their offense, but also as a decoy for their passing game to be effective. And the Bengals will need to find a way to get to the quarterback despite the injuries. I don't know if that means increased snaps for Geno Atkins finally. I don't think Sam Hubbard's coming back. That's probably not happening till after the bye. So, they're going to have to find somebody, and Carl Lawson's going to have a big game. Somebody's going to have to get in there. Exactly.
And I mean, yeah, like Taylor Lewan's not out there. So Ty Sembrelio is out there at left tackle, and they have rookie Isaiah Wilson, who a lot of Bengals fans remember in the draft process. He was picked right before the Bengals' second round selection. So he's at right tackle. Yeah, like it's now or never for the pass rush. They go into the bye. They already traded, Carlos Dunlap, so they're rolling in there with Amani Bledsoe and Carl Lawson. And, it would be nice to see Khalid Kareem, step up with potentially more snaps at his disposal. He's shown some nice things and has splashed a few times, but it'd be great to see him get, pressure the pocket and force Tannehill to make a bad decision, because, again, he's just not making very many of them. This game is probably going to come down to, just like last week, whoever has the ball last is going to score, and it might be the difference in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the expectation is the Bengals get the game-winning points with triple zeros on the clock. They can't leave any time left on the game clock, right? It's like, oh, geez.
Right. And if they go down, like I know I've been a proponent of running backs being devalued, but I mean Derrick Henry is one of the few guys that probably does matter. I don't think anybody should have any confidence in the Bengals slowing him down. If they can't limit the yards of the contact from Kareem Hunt, I'm scared to what's going to happen when they face Derrick Henry.
Yep. Well, we're going long here. We talked a little bit of our keys to the game. Let's call your shot here, John. Do you have a prediction, either an individual a unit or a score prediction or all of the above for this week. Week 8, Bengals take on the Titans before the merciful bye week that is coming up here.
It's merciful because there's a lot of injuries that the Bengals are dealing with, and it's making it a little bit difficult for me to make a certain prediction because I'm not really sure who's going to play. It seems like they're going to be down 3 offensive linemen. I don't think that Jonah Williams or Trey Hopkins are going to play in this game, even if they're listed by Zach Taylor as day-to-day. So you're probably going to have Akeem Adeniji at left tackle, Billy Price at center, and Fred Johnson at right tackle. I think Akeem might run into some struggles, but I think we're going to see a good game from Fred Johnson starting at right tackle. I think he had some struggles, obviously, at right guard, which was the position that he played entering the league. But I think we all know he's much more comfortable at tackle. And he showed some good things against Myles Garrett at left tackle. But a full game with preparation at a position that's more natural to him, I think he's going to play pretty well because, again, aside from Jeffrey Simmons, the Titans' pass rush is not very competent. I think Burrow's going to put up a good game again and keep this team competitive for as long as they can. But it's just hard for me to see them slowing down Tannehill and Henry.
So here you see it here. I should have brought this up a little earlier here, but I mean, this is as of Wednesday afternoon, the practice here. You look at the Cincinnati Bengals, Geno Atkins, Mike Daniels, Bobby Hart, Trey Hopkins, Joe Mixon, Phillips, Jonah Williams, and Brandon Wilson all did not practice for a variety of different reasons. Limited was Marcus Bailey, Ethan Carter, AJ Green, William Jackson, and Mike Jordan. And then, of course, you had John Ross back at practice, full practice. Interestingly enough, our good friend James Rapine relayed on Twitter that John Ross was taking some special team snaps at practice, so whatever that means. And then, of course, you've got quite a few guys on the Titans that did not practice. Clowney, Cruikshank, Christian Fulton, the rookie corner, Joseph, as you mentioned, Dennis Kelly, the tackle, Jeffrey Simmons, the talented interior defensive lineman, and Ty Smith, another corner, dealing with an issue there. So injuries all across the board here to a lot of different players for both. I just – part of me says the Bengals can keep this close, and maybe there's some remote possibility they sneak out a win. But between the injuries and between just the deflating nature of what happened last week, and maybe even some form of an emotional hangover of this whole Carlos Dunlap saga, I don't see this one going very well for the Bengals. I really don't. I think you're maybe looking in the 38-27 range, something like that. Maybe a little bit more manageable, but unfortunately, I just see there's just kind of too much to overcome for the Bengals this week against a good opponent too.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, they're still not a good team, and the Titans are probably going to win their division. It's not a game I think a lot of people are expecting them to win, but I think we all still expect growth from Burrow and the offense, and it'll just be fun to see how much they keep up because we know that this defense is probably not going to get the job done.
Yeah, well, we're going really long, getting close to an hour and a half, but we got to a ton of stuff. Let's drop the mic and get out of here. I just kind of want to say, John, thanks for taking the extra time tonight for these other interviews and this long show and spending the time and doing the work there. I know it's been a lot of work, not only for this show, but doing stuff on the website, reporting on all this stuff. So I just want to thank you, and thank you to our listeners as well for sticking with us. We still got a lot of live viewers hanging with us late on the Eastern time if you're joining us live. So I just want to share a little bit of gratitude.
Yeah, and this is something that I'd never really experienced before. I feel like I'm just always portraying a journalist and not actually being a journalist. I didn't go to school for it. But yeah, it was interesting to see how this has played out, and the fact that this situation got resolved right before we went on the air and we were given access and permission to really talk about it. So it's been an interesting week for this show and for me personally in my career, and I'm glad I got to share with all you guys that tuned in to listen.
Yeah, it looked as if maybe maybe Carlos Dunlap Sr. was joining us via Facebook. At least I saw a couple comments from a Dunlap Carlos, so I don't know if that was him or not, but if he did, that was kind of neat. And hey, it didn't end very well in terms of Carlos Dunlap and how it played out, but big respect to Carlos Dunlap and what he did for this organization. He was a big part of a lot of success, particularly in that 5 straight playoff appearance run that the team had. Some top defenses under Mike Zimmer. Very, very productive player. It's a shame, John, that he didn't get that franchise sack record because I think he more than deserved it.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, John. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. This has been a little bit of an extended version of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Get the show how you can on any number of audio platforms, on YouTube, on Cincy Jungle's Facebook page. We will be seeing you soon. Take it easy. Enjoy the rest of your week.